Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thanks for joining this meetup Service Design Salon, and I will be your guide for today. My name is Sakata. I work as a user experience architect in CONCENT Inc. And let me quickly introduce what Service Design Salon is, first of all. And this Service Design Salon is hosted by our team, a service design team in CONCENT Inc. And we've been holding this in monthly basis, inviting a few people from overseas as well and some outside company to actually have a discussion dedicated to service design. And today we will have Dirk, and also as a special guest. He is a founder and chairman of Involution Studios, and also a partner at Rosenfeld Media. I hope you know by reading many books in there. And for today, we will have an hour speak from Dirk, and afterwards we have a short break. And during the break, please feel free to get some drinks on side table. And afterwards, we have about 40 to 50 minutes discussion, welcoming Atsushi, my boss as well, and he actually is the owner of the Service Design Salon. And we have actually Professor Kaz from Chiba Institute of Technology. And actually this event held today is a collaboration with Service Design Salon and UXD Initiative. And UXD Initiative, I hope he'll explain later, but this is actually a meetup as well. And this Service Design Salon, this event will be hosted by Service Design Salon and UXD Initiative. And we'll have, well, I spoke too much I think, so I'll just pass on my microphone to Dirk to give his talk on UX and emerging technologies. So please welcome him with a warm applause, please.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and thank you to Mario and the organizers for welcoming me here. I come before you very humbly, as it's always an honor to come into another country to be permitted to speak my native tongue. If I attempted to speak yours, I would just be able to say hamachi and shutoro and sake, and that would be the end of it. So I'm very appreciative for your indulging my English talk today. What the top title of the talk is UX and Emerging Technologies, and it's actually the third in a decade-long series of talks that I've been giving. I'm someone who's interested in the future, more so than the present, something which makes me sort of continually dissatisfied and unhappy in my personal life, but periodically able to provide some interesting insights into things a little bit farther down the road. The first talk I gave in this series was in 2004 and 2005. It was called The Future of Digital Product Design, and it predicted and anticipated the mobile revolution that the iPhone brought along in 2007, and a lot of the trends that came there. The second talk in my series was in 2011. It was called Understanding Us, talking about the need to transition to deep knowledge of the social sciences, neuroscience, psychology, and sociology in order to take design and user experience to the next level. And now this is the first time I'm giving this talk, UX and Emerging Technologies, expanding a chapter that I wrote in an O'Reilly book recently, and looking a little bit farther into the future from this point in time. So I hope that you are interested and perhaps challenged by it. Yes, is that better? Yeah. Okay. Usually when I give a talk, I'm standing, I'm moving around, I'm thundering without a leg, so I feel very contained. This is a learning challenge for me. So our topics for today, the first section of the talk, we're going to talk about science fiction into science fact, which is really what's happening today. We're in the midst of seeing the science fiction of decades become the fact and the reality of what we're living and seeing in the world around us. Second, we're going to talk about UX evolution, going back historically, talking about UX as it manifests today, and then moving into the future of UX and how that's going to be changed and influenced by the impact of emerging technologies and the reality of science fact. So, back in the 1960s, there was a television show in the United States called Lost in Space, and they had this goofy robot that could talk and kind of shake side to side, and it was not very sophisticated, and this was the sort of vision that people had for robotics in the future. Today now, we have robots like the Pepper robot that are able to do very interesting and human-like things. They certainly are still far from being human, but it certainly goes far above and beyond the robots that science fiction gave us decades ago, and is realizing something closer to the sometimes perhaps scary reality of what robots could become and look like, and the functionality they can provide. And where we're going next, nobody knows for sure. There's something called the uncanny valley, which maybe some of you are familiar with. Once robotics get too human-like, they start to get weird for people. So there's some argument, some disagreement between people at the forefront of robotics about how robots will manifest. But one thing is for sure, Pepper is already amazing and here, and the robots just 5 years, 10 years down the road are going to really change the way that we live and work. And instead of just being a cool object that we see in a story on the news, are going to be things in our environments and in our lives. If I were giving this talk in 10 years, I would expect a robot, or perhaps multiple robots, to be integral parts of that experience. That's a remarkable change from how we've all grown up and lived to this point, I think. Also in the 1960s, we had Star Trek technology, the tricorder, the different devices that let the characters in the Star Trek universe divine the environment around them, divine information about people. Today, we already have the iPhone, a device that gets a lot of that functionality right. And if you have certain apps and certain add-ons, it even gets into some of the cool medical aspects of it. Like we've brought the tricorder already to reality. And where we're going next is even more exciting. People talk about the Internet of Things, which is obviously something that's happening far beyond just the iPhone. But this is, I'll talk about this more in the next point, but this is going to get into the hybridization of the biological self and the digital technologies in again, sort of scary but very interesting and potential-filled ways. Which brings us to the concept of cyborgs. In the 1980s, the RoboCop cyborg was a very sort of scary look into the future and where we were going. Now we have realized cyborgs. This is the eyeborg. This is a man who had an eye that wasn't working anymore, and so he is now experimenting with what he can do as a replacement for his eye. And this is one example of one of the concepts that he's worked on. The cyborg community is really being driven by the disabled community. If you think about people like Oscar Pistorius, that was once famous for running as opposed to for other things, but the iBoard and other examples as well, is really being driven by the disabled community. And in 2030, let's say looking out 15 years, it won't be driven by the disabled community anymore. It's going to be part of our lives. In 2030, I expect to be a cyborg. Not because I need a pacemaker to help my heart, but I think that I will make a choice to augment my physical self to make it more powerful, to move beyond myself in ways that are totally by choice, almost the equivalent of plastic surgery today, but the digitization and the enhancement of myself in crucial ways, probably ways related to my brain, based on my study and the way I'm looking at the technology. In terms of physical computing devices, about 15 years ago, we had a Minority Report vision of the sort of total gesture-based, immersive computing environments. We're not there quite yet. The monitors are getting there, but the gestures and the immersiveness certainly aren't. But in the future, we're heading that way. And again, not only from the standpoint of Minority Report, where it's more the human user separate from it interacting with the machine, but more of a direct user-to-machine interaction and integration. Again, getting very much into the synthesis of synthetic technology and biologics. to a very deep degree. And so looking at all of these technologies, and there's certainly others, I've just sort of cherry-picked 4 that I think are important. There are a lot of very complicated scientific and engineering aspects to these things that go far beyond what people in the user experience space have worked on or have thought about. We think about screens and mouse and swipes. We're talking here about products that to engineer them will have to bring together multiple highly complex technologies, each of which on their own would be very difficult to deal with. Another thing that's undergirding all of this change is the rise of artificial intelligence. We have made our careers on, again, the interface side of it. That AI is going to eliminate the interface side of it. It already is. It's going to turn it into talking. It's going to turn it into direct mind to machine. What is there going to be for UX professionals to do at that point? That's a question that maybe we'll come back to in a little bit in this talk. So let's use that moment to pivot to the evolution of UX over the years. User experience, the first documented articulation that I've been able to find of user or user's experience is in the 1930s. You first have the notion of the user and talking about an experience in the context of the user. Very informal, no field, no movement, but you could see the traces of it. In 1974, one of, or perhaps the earliest example of a formal presentation or a formal paper around user experience with the cyber graphics terminal, given at a conference. Not much happened with user experience over the next 20 years, but in 1993, a real landmark for UX, that's when Don Norman said at the Apple Computer, I am a user experience architect. Took that title and began to move design and user experience considerations into the conversation in the creation of digital products. In 2002, we had another blip up. I chose the book, The Elements of User Experience, as the demarcation point. You could choose others. But this was certainly a step forward in terms of the ubiquity of user experience as a discipline, but it was also a little bit of a step backward because it was the website design community that was really grabbing onto and appropriating the term user experience. Website design is a much less complex context than the creation of software proper, than the creation of digital products in a more significant way. So at the same point, you had user experience as a discipline really taking off and being formalized and legitimized, but you also had it looking at more narrow and provincial things. So that's an important demarcation point for a couple of different reasons. In 2007, the iPhone release and mobile apps and UX became everywhere. Whereas I think, for those of us with some gray hairs here knew in the early 2000s, it was sort of a closed community with UX. There still weren't a whole lot of people talking about UX or participating in it. After 2007, that totally changed. All kinds of designers were coming into UX, calling themselves UX, being interested in UX. Marketing was jumping in with both feet. That's when UX really, really took off. And now today, user experience is the de facto term for certainly software design, sort of specifically in website design, narrowly, but also has moved into other more strategic contexts, has a role in digital product design, sometimes works side by side with industrial design. I think these are examples that you're all familiar with as well. So having looked at that arc, now let's talk about a very simple anatomy of UX, so we can establish some terms and sort of an operating framework to talk about how these things are going to change. So UX includes research, the upfront going out information gathering in many different ways. UX includes design, and here I'm jamming a whole bunch of different stuff from strategy, product architecture, information architecture, interaction design, digital design, yada, yada, yada. If you are planning and thinking and strategizing and creating for the purposes of this presentation, I'm calling it design. There's UI engineering, which is the bridge between the creationary and what's happening in the back-end engineering itself. And then there's testing, some degree of testing in a lot of different ways, iteratively during creation, after release. Again, these are not new terms for any of us. So these are sort of the 4 frames in which I'm looking at UX during this talk. So now let's talk about the realities of UX training, because these are going to be really important with where the future is going and how well positioned perhaps all of us are for that future. the early pioneers in UX really didn't have formal training. Kind of fell ass backwards into UX. I went to school for philosophy. How I got here is sort of a circuitous route. I know some of the people who, like me, got in around the year 2000. Many of them weren't trained for design, weren't trained for disciplines that are the doing, are the skills. They tended to have more liberal arts, more eclectic backgrounds. So there wasn't a foundation in design or science or engineering. Maybe there wasn't research from graduate school people who learned how to do that ethnography stuff, like me. But there wasn't a lot of training. It was pretty ad hoc. Now it's certainly changed. Newer practitioners are receiving skills training, are receiving very specific and targeted skills approaches to engaging with UX. Particularly in UI engineering, there's all kinds of programs now teaching people on UI engineering side as well as the back-end engineering, frankly. But more and more now, I know the people that we hire at our company are coming from design schools. It's not the general background person. It's the people who come out of CMU. It's the people who come out of MIT. It's the people who come out of RIT. It's people with very specific practical skills training. And so the reality is, the older people, the younger people, very few of us have been trained to be experts, to be knowledgeable and talented and expert in software itself as a thing, in hardware, in physical materials, in science of really any stripe. A lot of times UX people don't like science, frankly, or technology. Again, a lot of times UX people demark themselves as the technologies over there. We're the design types or the research types or something a little bit different. So this is the framework for the training and for all of us, not any of us specifically, because obviously some of us break that mold, but for all of us collectively in this space. So now let's talk about creating digital products and start to pull some of this together. In the emerging period, which I'm going to call software pre-2000s, the way digital products were created was pretty simple. Person A had an idea. Person A built their thing, and then their thing was released. The presence of designers and user experience, it wasn't really there. It was pretty straightforward that somebody had a cool idea, and they went with it, and they made it happen. They made it go. Once it became more mature, moving into the last decade, the model is very different. So one person would have an idea, a different person would go out and research, a completely different person would do the design, a totally different person would do the engineering, a totally different person would do the testing, and then there would be a release. Now, there are other models, of course, for very small products, or we can all come up with counterexamples, but the sort of de facto standard of how things happen shifted from the sole creator model, which is a model, if we look at other industries, like one I'll talk about again is airplane design. Once upon a time, it took one, and it was pretty much just men, it was one dude who made an airplane. That ain't happening today. It's a very different context. And so we saw in the mature stage the transition from the one woman, one guy model of creation to the multidisciplinary UX team, collaborative approach with people somewhat siloed and focused oftentimes in rather narrow ways. So now let's talk about the future and what creating digital products might look like then. One person will have an idea. Whoops. And that same person will do research, that same person will do design, that same person will do engineering, and there will be somebody else who will do the testing. That person won't be doing the testing. And then for this same product, there will be a totally different person who's doing their own research, and their own design, and their own engineering, and it's going to be that other person doing the testing again, kind of across all of this stuff. So you have a model where, with these complex digital products, if we go back to a robot that has to deal with material science, that has to deal with artificial intelligence, that has to deal with UI user experience in much smaller ways, in ways that we're familiar with, among other disciplines, it's going to be people who are going very deep, who have deep scientific and engineering knowledge and experience, who are going to take these things and take parts of them and bring them to life. And then, there will be a release, And at the extreme, when you talk about these products, the team will look more like this, where you have people who are really smart and who have spent a lot of time getting really good at this one deep set of things, who is drilling it all the way through. And it's the same art on all these different things. We pretend these are 7 different people basically here. This is what these teams are going to look like. It's not going to be siloed and cut down vertically like before. It's going to be people owning these vertical parts of these highly complex products and contests. It's going to look really dissimilar from what we're accustomed to and what we've been trained to do and be successful in. So now let's pivot from there to talk about the future of UX. Creation is under threat. The people, the ones of us, and I'm generally among this group, who are the creationary individuals in the context of creating software and digital products, we're under threat. Research and testing are going to be okay. There's always going to be a need for research, and researchers can just go out there till the cows come home and research this and research that. That's a very flexible skill set and something that can be put into a lot of different contexts and remain very valuable. Same with testing. But design and UI engineering are really in deep trouble, frankly, in the way that we know them, in the way that we understand them, and in the way that people today are being trained to do and provide those things are going to have opportunities for in the future. And the reasons for this, I have just a few here, but on the software side, the gaps for software are being filled really quickly. Like 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't software to solve a lot of different problems. Now there's software for pretty damn near everything. A lot of it might not be very good, you can always improve it or do something new, but the green field, the open space where software can be this disruptive, new, fresh thing is largely filled. It's largely gone. There'll always be new contexts, new things will come, but the opportunities are narrowing. They're definitely narrowing. Over time now, many design patterns have been established. And again, 10, 15 years ago, it was the Wild West. Like, a lot of people were doing lots of different designs to solve the same problem in different ways. Nobody really agreed what the right solution was. But over the last decade plus, a lot of those things are winnowing down, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how the optimal design pattern for certain ways of behaving in a software system should be. These things are fairly known and fairly straightforward in most cases. And as I mentioned earlier, AI is replacing the need for UI, and that's the big one. I mean, that's the one that's going to come out of left field and really surprise us, and the jobs are going to be gone. Because the computer and the AI is going to remove the need for all of the different UI stuff that we put so much time and effort into wrangling and designing and making happen. And what are we going to be designing then? Maybe services. So what will the new normal look like? I'm just going to read this. If you do not have real science and engineering chops, you likely will not be part of true product creation and development. Some of you may stay and you may survive. Some of you will evolve and you'll up-level. Some of you, maybe many, will find other paths. And some will be left behind. And if you want an example of that, take a look at the graphic design field, where many people were completely left behind by the emergence of web, internet, software, and digital technologies. They're all still doing their logos and doing their projects like that. There's a market for some of them who are really good. There's a market for some of them who are willing to not get paid and aren't very good. But the future has moved beyond that. And that is a great example, an object lesson for all of us, because we could be the next graphic designers, the next phase of professionals who've been trained for a certain thing that's becoming obsolete quickly, and the way in which we will need to change to transition from where we are now to what the market will require is non-trivial, and requires things that are not necessarily comfortable or natural or desirable to us. So what's a creative to do? You can hang on, you can hope. And that will work for some people. There will continue to be some jobs there. This isn't going to all 100% go away. But we're in this weird moment where things are starting to go away as lots of new people are coming in. So there's a real imbalance in availability versus opportunity. You can remain in product creation if that's something that interests you, but pivot into more of a research and testing role. Those roles are going to continue to be there. In some ways, they're going to really expand, I think particularly in cultural, cross-cultural contexts, and going back to the understanding Rust stuff that I talked about in 2011, people who are expert in deep knowledge of the human condition are going to have a tremendous role in the future that is ahead of us. You can also choose to flex into design for more communications and marketing. That is the graphic designer path trod clear. That's there. There's going to be plenty of jobs in communications to make all this crazy tech stuff make sense. In marketing, for people who have digital backgrounds and user experience, that's another possible path for us all. Another good one is focusing on a specific vertical industry. Deep vertical knowledge will be more important than ever. If you're somebody who has liked to jump between different industries, that may not serve you well in the future that is to come. If you look at the industries where a lot of money are being spent, our company is actually focusing on healthcare because a ton of money is being spent there and they're really interested in software and user experience. Become an expert in that vertical. It will make you much more likely to keep a job that's similar to the job you've become accustomed to well into the future. And the last one, and the one that I think holds the most promise and potential, is to go deep into science and engineering. Because the people who really do the exciting and amazing and incredible things of tomorrow are going to be people who have deep scientific and engineering knowledge in some of the fields that I talked about before. And just as a sort of refresher on those, computer science, if you can go more into the computer science path, I mean, that's a really good one. I think there's some point decades out where that will be obsoleted by AI as well, but for now, that's a higher ground that could suit you well and be something that you're more familiar with. Artificial intelligence, I think, is probably the safest and highest ground of all. It's again, the future is AI in ways that are frightening, frankly. That horse has left the barn. It's happening and will continue to happen. So becoming expert, researching, and being someone who is part of the process of creating and manipulating artificial intelligence would serve you very well. Material science. So many of these things are about the relationship between the synthetic and the biological, and some of them are just plainly synthetic. That's going more in sort of an industrial design path, not explicitly in the way we understand it, but that notion of designing for the whole physical context. Knowledge there would be very valuable to you. Human physiology, getting to the biological side of this. We talked before about it, cyborgs. In 15 years, I'll bet you $1,000 I'll be a cyborg. I will bet that a lot of you who think that's batshit crazy will in fact be cyborgs in 2030. Get ready for your future, folks. So human physiology and understanding the relationship between how materials, how our organic matter, how our bodies work, interact with the devices and technologies that will be used to augment them will be critically important. And if you're ahead on that, you'll be way ahead of the curve on where these things are going. Genomics is a big one. That's one that our company is really into hardcore. We're doing a lot of works for genomics organizations. And that gets back into the human physiology stuff, but on a much more deep and personal level. That's sort of a level beyond, because where we're heading is not just towards the notion of cyborgs in a generic way, but things that are happening that are personalized to us, based on our DNA, based on our construction. And if you understand genomics, and if you're part of a design team that is able to craft the relationship between the individual self and the augmented reality, you'll be very, very well positioned. And then, neuroscience, psychology, and sociology, I've been banging that drum for half a decade now. Those are great because they'll help you in all of these emerging technologies, but they also will really help you if you prefer to stay in more of a traditional user experience context and or a research context in particular. The deep knowledge of humanity, of the self, is the area where I think designers explicitly can have the biggest impact in the decades ahead. Especially those of us, and I'm one, for whom science and engineering isn't that exciting, isn't that great. I didn't do good in in science and engineering in school. I didn't really like it. The notion for training up on that stuff isn't particularly super for me, but understanding people, understanding how to create better experiences, how to elicit a deeper connection and reaction from individuals, that resonates with my heart of design and creation, and the reason I've done all of this in the beginning. So those are perhaps some other paths to zig in as opposed to zagging. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dirk, for your wonderful presentation. I think, including me, some people are actually moved by your words, given saying that thinking of the future, you have maybe try to change your path or career opportunities by looking at this evolutions. Before we get into the short breaks and things, we'd like to keep people on the same page. But one thing that I'm curious about your words here and thoughts, including this presentation, is that so you have these concrete predictions of this rise of artificial intelligence and this importance of science and technologies. What is the core mantra of the prediction that you're giving in this presentation? Meaning that having to have this emergence of technologies and robotics is something that humans do, because humans are the ones who develop or build machines from themselves. So I think there's technical background, psychological background that allows them to actually build those kind of machines and technologies. So I'd like to give listen about your thoughts of what makes you achieve or think of making you think of these kind of predictions that you have in spectrum.
Yeah. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just how I solve problems and how I go through the world is looking into the future, and it tends to distill over 5-year periods, and this is it's just sort of the natural result of my researching and thinking about these things over the last years, basically. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, so you give that doing the research is part of the big opportunity to live throughout this kind of case. I understand that it's from your experiences, right?
Yes.
So another thing that I'm curious about is how are you interested in science fiction? A childhood experience, I think. I think there's some people who's listening to your presentation is also very eager to learn if they're interested in science fiction, including the cartoons and movies and etc. And I'd like to hear about your more of a private part of your presentation, your thoughts around science fiction.
Yeah, I've always been interested in science fiction. The notion of the future, the notion of where we're going, and how the world can be better than it's been. Like you, I've grown up in a world where there are nuclear bombs that could incinerate us all. And I grew up in a world where the smog in the major cities and the problems of global warming. I grew up in a world where you still have Russians rolling into the Ukraine and travesties committed everywhere. So I aspire to something better for humanity. I try to create those things on a micro level for myself, but my interest in science fiction is trying to harness the potential of humanity to get beyond our animalistic limitations, to get beyond the limits that are put on us by our sort of essential animal selves, and become exemplars of what is possible for our species.
So the reason why I ask you this question is that you mentioned about having this idea first to having to produce a digital product, right? So I think this, from my experience, the majority of the ideas come from this kind of inspirations, deeply rooted under science fiction or experience that you had in childhood, and something that you gain information from outside world, right? I think that's the origin that you get this, high potential ideas that are worth building for people across the world. How do you think about that? The inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's right.
So, do you have any other questions that before we move on to the talk with Sushi and Kaz? Do you have any questions that you have to get to Dirk? No? Okay, I'll give you that.
Yeah, I have one question about so you show the history of the expense and on the 2002. Maybe so you mentioned about JC Jones Garrett's user experience in web design. And I have used it so in web design, so there is less context or something. You say so. What do you exactly mean less context?
Yeah, so my premise is that the purpose and function of a website, particularly the way websites manifested in 2002, was a relatively flat and not rich information interaction between a user and the thing, the website. Before that, user experience, even though it was used much less, it was being used in context of software design as well as, to a much lesser degree, hardware design. And so my premise is that by website design sort of appropriating user experience and shifting the study and the evolution of user experience to focus on website design, it actually moved website design into a less complicated, a less potent context. And so in some ways, it certainly helped UX grow, but I think it also hampered UX achieving the potential of what it could be in being applied in more complicated contexts.
I got it. I think this is very key issue for our consideration about user experience, because in this era, maybe Internet of Things, maybe so there are less context thing maybe, or yeah, I understand what you are saying, what you are talking about, and let me talk about later.
Thank you.
That's what I see as well. But if you go to Google user experience, what you see is mostly based on software design and that product. And I think the curiosity is that the word design is it also includes by not only design physical product or something you see visually, is that you try to design a whole experience that who uses it, including architecture. They not only just build the architecture itself, but they only consider people who use or who enter those kind of buildings and try to enjoy the atmosphere and circumstances. So I think that's one of the curiosity that I see why people of the web wasn't very eager to actually go into the world user experience and spread the ideas and not the product design visuals. What do you think of that? What makes people from the software who is very making them eager to actually get into this world UX, not product design?
I think it was a context that people could jump into and be successful with, because it doesn't require science and engineering in the same way. It dealt with things having to do with words. It dealt with things related to, frankly, a liberal arts education. It was very fertile ground then for people who were sort of inherently creative but not trained, without the skills, to come in and not just participate, but invent essentially a discipline and invent ways of doing things in a context of technology and in a context that certainly at that time was very lucrative as well.
I think you mentioned a very good point about not having to actually have a knowledge on particular for science and technology and engineering, etc. But I think from my experience itself, I think UX was part of the science. I think that's one of the scientific methods to actually build software products. And having to spread those ideas, talking with clients or people who we consider engaging into the same product or the projects was very understandable in terms of user experience, the way of building products and designs. So I think the time has been changed in saying that the term science is very broad and it's very hard to define what I mean by design, because design can be science at some moment, and science can be design at some moment. And I think this is a very long history to talk, and we'll have a time meeting to discuss, so I'm going to keep it later. But is anyone else having questions or comments to Dirk at this moment? Please, I'll give you my time.
It's more about science fiction, about the robotic. So do you think that later the robot will we have emotion. This may be the biology mixed with the technology.
Yes, I do. I actually believe that emotions are entirely scientific. This is going to get into some inside baseball, but I'm a hard determinist, so I believe that everything we do, there's not free will. The things that we do could be predicted by virtue of looking at the entirety of our history and context, by the entirety of our genetic makeup, by the environmental influences of the moment, by all of the chemicals firing in our body. If we had the ability to unwrap all of that, we could predict the way that all of us behave from moment to moment to moment. And I thus believe that emotions are, I hate to use this word, but emotions are less special than humans ascribe them to be, that they ultimately are a result of us as the human animal manifesting our specific and particular way within an exact context. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Oh, it's okay. It's perfect.
Anyone else have any comments or views or comments to share? Yes, sure.
I'm very impressed by your vision, and also I'm worried about it's for my career and for my future because I'm a UX designer. And I have a question about collaboration. As you said, maybe most designer will have hybrid skills, such as design science and design engineering. And in this kind of situation, do you think collaboration style or collaboration methodology will be changed?
I think that collaboration will still be very important, but it will be at a scale that is so different from what we now are accustomed to. And I'll go back to the design of an airplane as an example of that. There's literally thousands of people required to design a modern airplane. Like if you take just one aspect of it, the engine of an airplane, that in and of itself has whole multiple teams of experts who are deeply knowledgeable about, I don't know the right terms, so I won't even try, but are deeply knowledgeable about the different things that go into making a great engine. And so there is, we'll call it the propeller, to use an old technology, but I understand. There will be a team that is expert in dealing with the propeller, and there will be collaboration within that team. But crucially, there will also be a lot of collaboration between the propeller team and the other 8 teams on that engine. And whoever's running the engine team, or however that structure is, there will be huge collaboration between that person and the wing team, or the dynamics team, So, yeah, I think collaboration will be every bit as important as it is now, but the scale is sort of beyond what I can show on a slide, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think he brought up a very good point about the collaboration. Is that when I heard about you, about let's say the one who has a specialistic dedicated to a certain field, having to collaborate together. I think one company that I noticed is IDEO, which they have a very dedicated team on certain industry field, including the neuroscience and brain science and healthcare and even dentists, right? Allowing them to form a specialized team to actually design certain products and things. But having to talk about collaboration, I think it is getting very difficult and year by year to actually make them actually think together and form a single path, looking at the same vision, to actually speak in same languages. Is I think one of the difficulties to form a collaboration between different, diverse segments or specialized people. How do you think about that to actually overcome this kind of collaboration issues?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think it comes back to the understanding of us. I mean, it's so vital that to get the most out of teams, to get the most out of people working together, we need a deeper understanding of ourselves and a deeper understanding of each other. And right now, there's no common shared language for these things. The closest thing to it is the Myers-Briggs, and a lot of people think the Myers-Briggs is bullshit. I think that it's interesting, but it can only go so far. But we need something where we have a language and we say that the idea of humanity, being a person, involves these facets. Here's the language around it. Here's how we figure it out for all of us. Figure out how you are and work on yourself. Here's who I am. Figure out who I am. Let's work together. And I think there will be a lot of science to that as well, where we can put people together and we can predict who's going to work well together and who's not, and a lot of stuff that we're just miles away from now. I mean, now it's just a manager with good intuition who kind of gets it with this person with that person. I mean, that's not scalable. That's not scalable at all. And we see failed collaborations and bad projects all over the place, and it's due to the complete ignorance of understanding of ourselves, understanding of each other, and having ways to communicate and organize who we are and what we're doing together.
So that's the thing that I was considering at this moment, and what I always see is the word empathy. I mean, that does not take anything, right? Just having to say that you have an empathetical feeling to understand what he is or what I do, and etc. I think this, because we all speak some kind of languages to each other, even though if it's in the same country or different organization, etc. So I think this having to see shared understanding and languages is one of the key factors, I think, for collaboration. And most people think, including me, believe that user experience or the customer itself is the answer to it. And I think there's, of course, there are many other answers that you can think of to share the same way of understanding in languages. And maybe we can take that to the next talk as well, but thanks for your help.
Sure.
Any others before we get into the short break? Or maybe we need some time to understand what is spoke in this 30 minutes. So maybe just we're going to take some time for a break. We'll get back in 10 minutes to have a talk, including Dirk and Matsushinha. So stay tuned.
そういうデザインの配信。